Little Red Riding Hood. Animals and birds have been adopted as symbols by nations from antiquity. The exact manner in which certain countries became associated with certain symbols is not always plain, but a few of them are traceable and are of importance to us as we study the symbology of the much-loved story Little Red Riding Hood. If we understand that the Saxon folktales are intrinsically messages to us in code, we must establish an index or alphabet by which we can decode the story. England is widely represented as a bull. In cartoons, John Bull with the Union Jack as a vest is the universal figure for Great Britain. From our study of Jack and the Beanstalk, we have discovered the origin of this nomenclature, the bull or cow being the symbol for the tribe of Ephraim. Russia is a bear, the United States has adopted the flying eagle in its heraldry, and we have since treated with the lion found upon the flag of Scotland and also upon the royal coat of arms of the British monarchy, which stands for Judah and the House of David. There are countless references in the Bible to Judah as the lion, and Jesus himself is referred to as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. It is of interest to us here that John, in his description of his view of the throne of heaven, speaks of 4 beasts which were around the throne. The first beast was like a lion, and the second beast like a calf, cow or bull, and the third beast had the face of a man, and the fourth beast was like a flying eagle. We have already seen how 3 of these creatures are adopted as symbols by 2 of the leading nations of the earth today. Is there some connection between these vibrant creatures that hover around the throne of heaven and the countries which have adopted them for national emblems? There undoubtedly is, but let it suffice here to note that the nations of the world are identified by certain symbols taken from the animal world. There are a few exceptions, the harp of Ireland being a notable one. The harp is an emblem, however, for the throne of David, the original harp belonging to David being brought with Jeremiah as he fled with the daughters of Zedekiah from pillaged Jerusalem in 580 BC. This telling symbol, proudly displayed upon the flag of Ireland, speaks more loudly than words of the role the Emerald Isle has played in the destiny of both Judah and Israel. We shall focus attention upon one country, or one city, of Europe, to which a variety of symbols has been applied. There is the modern caricature of the boot given to Italy because its outline upon the map suggests a boot. Rome today is called the City of the 7 Hills, a name which is as old as the city itself. It is by this characteristic that we find the city defined in the Bible. The 7 heads of the beast are the 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. Revelation chapter 17, verse 9. By this method we may identify the woman, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth, with Rome. In this chapter of Revelation, the various natures of this woman are dealt with, and by a study of this many-sided creature, we find that she has a military, a political, an economic, and an ecclesiastical makeup. In the drama of history, she has played upon the stage of the world in all of these roles. We shall see in the story of Little Red Riding Hood how all 4 phases of Rome's power affect Israel. We shall therefore look back into the very beginnings of Rome, to the legend of the founding of the city upon the banks of the Tiber, at a time fixed at about 753 BC. The story of Romulus and Remus is too well known to dwell upon in full detail, but let us recall that one of the daughters of the royal house of Latinus, into which family Aeneas of Troy had married, had twin sons. A tyrant king who had usurped the throne had the babes thrown out upon the banks of the Tiber. A she-wolf found the infants, carried them to a nearby cave, and nursed them. A shepherd named Faustulus came upon them, took them home with him, and raised them to manhood. They overcame the usurper of the throne and set themselves up as rulers. To celebrate, they decided to found a new city. In a quarrel over the site of the city, Remus was killed, and the site selected by Romulus on the Palatine Hill overlooking the Tiber was the one chosen. The city, of course, was named after him. It was called Rome. Thus Romulus, who was nursed at the teats of a she-wolf, was the founder of Rome, and the wolf has always been adulated by the Romans for the part it played in the origin of the city. With this in mind, let us approach the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Next to the girl herself, the most prominent characterization in the story is that of the wolf, who meets her as she goes along the way to her grandmother's home. We get a picture of a guileless, happy girl, who little suspects the design which the wolf has upon her when they meet. We have already become acquainted with the little girls who set off through the woods in the person of Snow White and of Gretel, and we have discovered in them symbols for Israel. More properly, Little Red Riding Hood has the happy, laughing character of Isaac, whose name means laughter. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all that hear will laugh with me. Genesis chapter 21, verse 6. Although Little Red Riding Hood inherits some of this happy, sunny nature, for the purposes of this story she shall be likened to the children of Israel, who set off so long ago on their journey through the wilderness to the Isles of the West. With the opening of this story, we find the mother of Little Red Riding Hood sending her off with a basket through the woods to see her grandmother. By the very nature of her journey through the woods, we can identify the girl as Israel. But who is the mother in this new setting, and who is the grandmother? Their true natures will be revealed to us as we continue. The story is almost too well known to recount. What child has not heard it at his mother's knee? The general appeal of this tale is unequaled in fairy lore, yet few there are who, hearing it, suspect the hidden message it contains. We shall touch upon such portions of it as shall give us a glimpse of its theme. Having decoded the character of Little Red Riding Hood as Israel, and the wolf as Imperial Rome, we can readily see that the central theme of our story revolves around the relationship of Israel with Rome. Since the wolf was associated with Rome from the time of its very founding as a city, we can judge that this symbol incorporates all of Rome within its usage. The military strength of Rome is matched only by the development of her superb genius for self-government. When these two aspects of her power became unbalanced and she fell apart politically, we meet up with a new kind of supreme authority that arose out of the ashes of the old, like the phoenix bird. This was the Rome that produced the papacy and covered all of Europe ultimately as the Holy Roman Empire. Indeed, the symbol of the wolf embraces all of Rome, from its birth in 753 BC on the banks of the Tiber to the present day, as the story will disclose. We shall not pursue here the history of Rome from its inception, but treat with it only as it affects Israel and her destiny. Let us go back only to the year 55 BC, and look upon the land which the Romans had named Britannia. Observe this far-off island and see the armor-clad legions of Julius Caesar as they jump from their boats and commence the subjugation of the island to Roman might. Why should Julius Caesar, already covered with glory by his exploits on the continent, brave the currents of the English Channel to pursue the glories of war in this faraway land? We shall find some of the answers as we study this innocent child's story and compare it with certain passages of the Bible and the prophecy contained therein. To continue with history, Julius Caesar made 2 expeditions against the Celts and conquered but a portion of the Isles. This we may be sure of. The Celts made rebellious subjects, and during the next 100 years, the Romans were too busy elsewhere to give much attention to them. It was not until the time of Emperor Claudius, 41 to 54 AD, that legions were sent again to the island. The Britons fought this time for 9 years before they were conquered. Their defeat gave the Romans only the southern part, however. It was Boadicea, queen of one of the tribes in Britain, who precipitated the next war. This made the Romans more deeply entrenched as masters than ever. Some Roman soldiers cruelly mistreated her and insulted her 2 daughters. Escaping, she drove her chariot through the land, calling the people together. Although the Britons fought fiercely, they were soon subdued. All who were not willing to obey them fled to the mountains to join the Picts of Caledonia, Scotland, and the Scots of Ireland. From time to time, raids were made upon the conquered areas, and to prevent these inroads into the country, the Romans built 3 walls more than 70 miles long across the island at its narrowest point. These were named for the 3 emperors by whose orders they were built: Hadrian, Antonius, and Severus. Along the walls at intervals were towers, where the Roman soldiers stood on guard night and day. With this bit of history in mind, let us begin with our story. We find the mother calling to Little Red Riding Hood. "Come, Little Red Riding Hood, here is a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. She is ill and weak, and they will do her good. Set out before it gets too hot. When you are going, walk nicely and do not run off the path." Compare this episode with the opening verses of chapter 7 of Revelation. "And I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was given to hurt the earth, Rome, and the sea, the peoples of Rome, saying, Hurt not the earth, nor the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads." The servants of God in this passage are the children of Israel, poised and ready at the entranceway to Europe. It was a great angel who was guiding them and protecting them, holding back the destructive invasions of Italy by the Goths and the Vandals until such time as the Israelites had safe passage to Saxony, Normandy, and England. The mother in our story can be associated with the great angel of God, sent to guard over Israel as she advanced through the wilderness of Europe to her destination. This great miracle of timing was witnessed by John, as he beheld future events being revealed to him by the ascended Jesus. The angel of God, seeing and knowing all things according to God's plan, knew that many of Israel had already arrived in Ireland and England. During the time of the bondage of the children of Israel in Egypt, she had watched the escape of many of the Zerah branch of the house of Judah to Troy, to Greece, to Latinus, and to the isles of the west. This same protecting angel watched over the escape of Jeremiah and Baruch from conquered Jerusalem. Forced into fleeing to Egypt, they made their way together, accompanied by the daughters of the king, Jeremiah chapter 43, verses 6 and 7, to Ireland, thus carrying out God's plan that the throne of David should have an heir. Without a doubt, this same great angel watched over the union of one of the king's daughters with a prince of the Zerah branch of Judah, continuing the royal line of David for posterity. It is here that we find our clue to the identity of the grandmother to whom the mother sent her daughter with food and refreshments. Since the progeny of the marriage of Zedekiah's daughter to a prince of the Zerah branch of Judah caused the continuation of the royal line of David in the land of Ireland, and later Scotland and England, she may rightly be referred to as the grandmother of the kings of Ireland, Scotland, and England. For it is through her that all who have sat upon the stone of Scone have held rightful claim to the throne of David, and it was to her that all Israel could give thanks for continuing the reign of David in their new homeland. During the time that Rome's military hold upon the island was weakened, the children of Israel began to arrive under the names of the Angles, the Jutes, and confederated tribes called the Saxons. The grandmother lived in a little cottage out in the wood, and Little Red Riding Hood was admonished to stay upon the path and go directly to her. It is obvious that she didn't know what her grandmother looked like, or else she would not have been fooled so easily by the wolf. The symbol of the cottage is well established in Saxon folklore as meaning England and Ireland, both famed for their cots. Hence, we may deduct that, with the use of this strange imagery, the story of the migration of Israel is being retold, the escape from her place of captivity in Assyria to the land north and west, England. Just as Little Red Riding Hood entered the wood, a wolf met her. Little Red Riding Hood did not know what a wicked creature he was, and was not at all afraid of him. It will be remembered that, by a series of questions, the wolf found out where Little Red Riding Hood was going. All the time eyeing her, the wolf thought to himself, "What a plump mouthful! She will be better to eat than the old woman. I must act craftily so as to catch both." We are familiar with the part of the story where the wolf induced Little Red Riding Hood to go off the path into the wood in search of flowers, while he scampered to the grandmother's cottage. Pretending to be the granddaughter, he knocked, entered the door, and ate the old woman up. The eating of the grandmother is represented in history by the attempted conquest of England by Julius Caesar, an attempt to take by force the land destined to receive the children of Israel. The grandmother was a little hard to digest in the wolf's stomach, which is to say that, although England fell nominally under the control of Rome's military rule, she never actually reached Ireland or Scotland, nor did she thoroughly digest that part of England which she had gobbled up. Ireland and Scotland, for over 1,000 years to secretly nurture the throne of the House of David, were never actually subservient to Rome. The transfer of the Stone of Scone from Scotland to England by Edward in the year 1296 marked the final transfer of the House of David to its present resting place, London. He cropped off the top of his young twigs and carried it into a land of traffic. He set it in a city of merchants, as related by Ezekiel, from Ezekiel chapter 17, verse 4. This transfer came at a time when all of the children of Israel had arrived in England and were ready to again unite into a nation and a company of nations, as promised by God to Abraham so long before. The next phase of the story marks another page in history. The wolf, having eaten the grandmother, donned her gown and cap and covered himself in her bed. Upon the arrival of Little Red Riding Hood, Israel, she was amazed to find the door of the cottage, England, open. Then began the famed set of exclamations made upon sight of the wolf. "Oh, grandmother, what big ears you have!" "Oh, grandmother, what big eyes you have!" "Oh, grandmother, what large hands you have!" "Oh, grandmother, what big teeth you have!" At this point in the story the listening child was wide-eyed and expectant, but Little Red Riding Hood suspected that it was not her grandmother who lay in the bed. It is incongruous to believe that she was completely deceived by the wolf. This act in the drama of Israel's adventure is reflected in the sending of Augustine to England in 596 A.D., a time when most of the Israelites had arrived on the English shores. The military power that was Rome's had given way to a new hierarchy of the papacy in Rome. With the desertion of Rome by Constantine and the setting up of his throne in the east, the rulership of Rome was taken over by the bishops. The temporal reins of government, which had been with the emperor, now gravitated to the Bishop of Rome, who came to be known as the Pope. With this change in garments, like the wolf who donned the nightgown, the greed that was Rome's reached out again for Israel and for habitation. In the person of Augustine, Rome reached out again toward England. Augustine was received in England not without much skepticism and not without rejection. It is true that he won Ethelbert, the Saxon king of Kent, to his cause 597 A.D., and with the king 10,000 of his subjects accepted the spiritual sovereignty of Rome and the Pope. Not versed in the facts, Ethelbert did not question the statement by Augustine that Peter had founded the church at Rome. He was unaware that Peter actually had been stationed in Babylon and probably had never seen Rome. 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 13. Ethelbert was so won over by the priestly costumes and the appearance that Augustine and his fellows made that he agreed to persuade his friends to the north into the new order. These were the Celts of the north, who had been Christians for hundreds of years before the coming of Augustine. There is today a famed oak in Worcester called Augustine's Oak, which was the scene of his rejection by these wary prelates of early Christianity. Using tact, Augustine asked only 3 things of them in allegiance. First, that they should celebrate Easter in the Roman manner. Secondly, that they adopt the Roman rite of baptism. And lastly, that they join with him in the conversion of all the Saxons to the Roman faith. Upon the advice of a hermit, everything that Augustine asked was flatly refused. But in their naivety, these few Saxons of Kent had opened the way for the Roman Church in England. Little by little, England succumbed to this subtle influence from a foreign land. The culminating action was in 668 A.D., when Pope Vitalian appointed Theodore of Tarsus as Archbishop of Canterbury and ordered all services said in Latin. From that day onward until the day of John Wycliffe, the Bible was a closed book to Englishmen in their own land. This victory of the Roman spiritual regime in England is symbolized in our story by the eating of Little Red Riding Hood by the wolf being Rome in a different garb. The climax of the story came when the wolf, who had eaten the grandmother, ate up Little Red Riding Hood too. Just how the two kept alive in the stomach of the wolf is not explained, but they did. And this factor is eloquent of the status of Israel today. Alive, yes, but deep within the stomach of the wolf, as we shall see. It is a matter of wonder to the child, hearing the story for the first time, that Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother could remain alive in the stomach of the wolf. Equally so, it is a source of wonder that Israel and the throne of David are in full existence in the world today. No wonder she has lost all memory or consciousness of being Israel. In this connection, it is well to consider the hood that Little Red Riding Hood was given to wear. A hood is a cloth piece thrown over the head, oftentimes to hide one's identity. The hooded knight of old was one whose name was unknown, who often battled fiercely while incognito. In the art of falconry it was customary to place a hood over the head of the falcon until the prey was spied, and then the hood was removed and the bird freed to fly to its mark. The hood, let us recall, was not worn by the maiden in the story until given her by her mother. Thus, in the symbology of Red Riding Hood, we find another of the characteristics of modern Israel. A hood is over her head. God made a promise to Abraham which was renewed with Isaac and again with Jacob. This promise God intends to fulfill. But due to disobedience and the willful ways of the sons of Israel, they have fallen under the penalty of disobedience to the laws of God. One of these penalties was the loss of the knowledge of their origin and their destiny while enduring years of chastisement. Only today, after the passing of centuries of hardship and struggle, is Israel discarding her hood. One by one, those of Israel who are called and chosen and faithful are awakening and becoming aware of the rich heritage that is theirs in God. Through our study of other Saxon folk tales, we have obtained vivid glimpses of the pages of Israel's history, and we have seen how Israel made 3 separate attempts to lift the yoke of spiritual bondage placed upon her neck by Rome. The military yoke of Rome had been lifted when the Goths and the Vandals descended upon Italy and pillaged her cities, even the sacred city of Rome itself. It was in the interval that Rome's martial might was broken and the papacy rose to power that the children of Israel passed safely over to England and settled there. In hardy Saxon manner, Henry VIII broke the religious ties that bound England to Rome, and in France it was King Francis the Fair who in 1303 AD rejected allegiance to Rome. It was Francis who toppled the throne of the Pope at Rome and set up his own Pope in France, creating the first threat to the prestige and sovereignty of Rome in northern Europe. Finally, it was another Frenchman, Napoleon Bonaparte, who in 1798 marched on Rome and took the Pope prisoner, thus marking the end of the political supremacy of the papacy. However, that other facet of Babylon's hold upon humanity, the economic aspect of this creature, is still present with us, and its octopus-like grip has reached out to control every corner of the earth today. A description of this enslavement is found in the 18th chapter of Revelation. In this sense, all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. Revelation chapter 18, verse 3. There is no better description to be found anywhere of the state of the world today. War is indeed a lucrative business, and the merchants in guns and ammunition selling on all sides are merchants of war and destruction, agents of Babylon. In this respect, Israel is still prisoner within the stomach of the wolf, and seemingly there is no help for her. However, the story of Little Red Riding Hood had a happy ending. When the wolf appeased his appetite, he lay down again in bed, fell asleep, and began to snore very loud. The huntsman was just passing the house, and thought to himself, "How the old woman is snoring! I must just see if she wants anything." So he went into the room, and when he came to the bed, he saw that the wolf was lying in it. "Do I find thee here, thou old sinner?" said he. "I have long sought thee." Then, just as he was going to fire at him, it occurred to him that the wolf might have devoured the grandmother. So he took a pair of scissors and began to cut open the stomach of the sleeping wolf. When he had made 2 snips, he saw the little red hood shining, and then he made 2 snips more, and the little girl sprang out, crying, "Ah, how frightened I have been! How dark it was inside the wolf!" And after that the aged grandmother came out alive also, but scarcely able to breathe. In Saxon story form, here is another account of the first resurrection, Revelation chapter 20, verses 5 through 6. We will readily recognize the rescuing huntsman as Jesus the Christ, who knows well the machinations of his ancient enemy, that old serpent which is the devil and Satan, who by his intervention shall be taken from the earth and properly dispatched into the bottomless pit. Revelation chapter 20, verses 2 to 3. And the Lamb shall overcome them, the kings who received power from the beast, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. Revelation chapter 17, verse 14. The entry of the huntsman through the door of the cottage can be likened to the imminent return of our Lord, as related in Luke chapter 21, verse 27. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. The knife or scissors with which the huntsman opened the stomach of the wolf can likewise be found symbolically expressed in the Scriptures. In the description of Jesus by John in the 1st chapter of Revelation, he is depicted as standing in a long robe that reached to the feet, and tied about the waist by a shining golden girdle. His face and his hair shone with the brightness and sparkle of the sun itself, and his eyes also sparkled as though of fire. His feet, his whole figure shone out ablaze with light, so bright that the eyes could scarcely behold him. When he spoke to John, it seemed that his voice sounded sweet and rich and melodious as the sound of many waters, and he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword. Revelation chapter 1, verses 12 through 16. This word picture of the Master Jesus is in its simplicity one of the most eloquent descriptions of Jesus that we have. John was physically overcome and swooned at the feet of Jesus at the sheer power of his awesome presence. Such a vision as John had is a true vision of the cosmic Christ, who at his appointed hour shall come to rescue his own. His words at his coming will lash out like lightning, free the overcomers from the fateful grasp of the beast, the wolf of our story, and raise them with him into the glory of the resurrection.